Welcome to the channel Immediate Speak English for Arabic. On this channel, there are lots of videos, tips and tricks, podcasts, and English stories that can help improve your English speaking skills. At this moment, I will share a special video for beginners. But first, I want to remind you that I created and shared this video for free. I hope you will click subscribe and comment after watching this video for 3 minutes. Okay, let's get started.
Hi, Mr. Han. I'm excited about our chat today. I've been really curious about nouns. Could you help me understand them better?
Of course, Jane. I'm glad you're interested. Nouns are words we use to name people, places, things, or ideas. They're like the building blocks of language because they represent the subjects of our sentences.
Oh, I see. So, everything I can see or talk about can be a noun?
Exactly, Jane. But nouns are not just a big mixed bag. We actually divide them into different types. We'll explore these categories one by one, starting with concrete nouns, abstract nouns, countable nouns, uncountable nouns, and compound nouns.
Very interesting. Are concrete nouns, abstract nouns, countable nouns, uncountable nouns, and compound nouns themselves further divided into more types?
Concrete nouns themselves are divided into several categories, including common nouns like city, collective nouns like team, proper nouns like Jane, and material nouns like gold. To make it clearer now, let's explain these nouns one by one in easy language and give examples. I'll explain each type of noun in detail and keep it simple so it's easy for everyone to understand.
Hi, Mr. Han. I've been hearing a lot about concrete nouns and abstract nouns in English. Can you help me understand what concrete nouns are?
Of course, Jane. I'd be happy to explain. Concrete nouns are simply the names of things that we can see, touch, hear, smell, or taste. They're all about the things we can perceive with our senses. For example, apple is a concrete noun because you can see it, touch it, and taste it.
Oh, I see. So it has to be something physical that exists in the real world?
Exactly. Anything that has a physical form and can be observed through any of the 5 senses qualifies as a concrete noun. This includes people, places, and objects, like teacher, park, and ball.
How about something like music? I can hear it, but I can't touch it or see it.
Great question, Jane. Music is an interesting case. The sound of music is indeed something we can hear. So the names of types of music or musical instruments are considered concrete nouns. For instance, piano is a concrete noun because it's a physical object that produces music, which we can hear.
I got it now. So animals and foods are concrete nouns too, right?
Absolutely. Animals and foods are perfect examples of concrete nouns. Dog, cat, pizza, and cake are all things you can see and touch. They are very much real and concrete.
What about places? You mentioned them earlier. Can you give me more examples?
Sure. Places like school, library, restaurant, and beach are all concrete nouns. These are specific locations that you can visit, see, and experience.
This is making a lot of sense. So, I guess it's pretty easy to find concrete nouns all around us, in everyday life.
Exactly, Jane. Once you start looking for them, you'll notice that concrete nouns are everywhere. They make up a huge part of our language because they help us describe and interact with the world around us.
Mr. Han, what if I think of something like happiness or love? They feel real, but I can't see or touch them.
Good observation, Jane. Happiness and love are actually examples of abstract nouns, not concrete ones. They represent ideas, qualities, or states that you cannot perceive with your senses directly. We'll dive into those another time. For now, let's focus on identifying and understanding concrete nouns.
Mr. Han, you mentioned concrete nouns, but are there different types of concrete nouns?
Absolutely, Jane. Concrete nouns can be divided into several categories: common nouns, collective nouns, proper nouns, and material nouns. Each type has its unique characteristics.
That sounds interesting. Could we start with common nouns?
Of course. Common nouns are general names for a person, place, thing, or idea. They're not capitalized unless they start a sentence. For example, city, river, apple, and teacher are all common nouns. They refer to general items or concepts, not specific ones.
I see. So what about proper nouns then? How are they different?
Proper nouns name specific people, places, or organizations, and always start with a capital letter. For example, Jane, New York City, and United Nations are proper nouns because they refer to specific individuals, cities, and organizations. Good question. Proper nouns are specific names of people, places, organizations, and sometimes things. They are always capitalized because they refer to specific, unique entities. For example, Jane, Mr. Han, London, and the Eiffel Tower are proper nouns. They give the exact name of a person, place, or organization.
Oh, that makes sense. So, river is a common noun, but Nile River is a proper noun because it's the specific name of the river.
Exactly. You've got it. Now, let's talk about collective nouns. These are really interesting because they refer to a group of things or beings as a single entity. For example, family, team, flock, and crowd are collective nouns. Even though they refer to more than one person or thing, we often treat them as a single unit when we talk about them.
That's a bit tricky but very fascinating. Can you tell me about material nouns too?
Certainly. Material nouns refer to the matter or substance from which things are made. They are not individual objects, but rather the stuff that objects are composed of. For example, gold, water, air, and wood are material nouns. These nouns are particularly useful when talking about what things are made of or discussing their substance.
So, if I say the ring is made of gold, gold is a material noun because it's what the ring is made from?
Precisely. You're really catching on fast. Material nouns are all about the composition of objects, not the objects themselves.
This is so helpful. Knowing these categories makes it easier to understand and categorize concrete nouns. But how do I practice using them correctly?
A great way to practice is by reading books or articles and trying to identify the concrete nouns and their categories. Or, while you're walking outside or just going about your day, think about the nouns you see and try to categorize them. Is it a common noun or a proper noun? Maybe it's a material noun or a collective noun?
Got it. What about these abstract nouns you mentioned?
Good question. Abstract nouns represent ideas, qualities, or conditions that you can't see, touch, or measure. They're things you feel or think about, like love, freedom, or intelligence. They're contrasted with concrete nouns, which are things you can interact with physically, like apple, dog, or house.
Oh, I see. So, if I'm talking about happiness, love, or freedom, am I talking about abstract nouns?
Exactly, Jane. You've got it. Happiness, love, and freedom are all things you can feel or think about, but you can't hold them in your hand like you can hold a book or a cat. Those are perfect examples of abstract nouns.
Yes, Mr. Han, I'm curious about how we can create abstract nouns. How does that work?
It's quite fascinating, actually. Many abstract nouns are formed by adding suffixes to verbs. A suffix is a part added to the end of a word to create a new word, often with a new meaning. For abstract nouns, common suffixes include ment, ion, ants, tion, or ation, ing, and
That sounds like a lot. Could we go through each one with examples?
Of course, let's start with ment. When you add ment to a verb, it often describes the action or result of what the verb expresses. For instance, achieve turns into achievement, and enjoy becomes enjoyment.
Oh, I've heard those words before. What about ion and its variations?
Great question. Adding ion, tion, or ation to a verb can turn it into a noun that often denotes the action or condition of the verb. For example, celebrate becomes celebration, and inform turns into information.
That makes sense. And what's next? Ants and ents, right?
Precisely. These suffixes often form nouns that express a state or quality. From accept, we get acceptance, and from depend, we derive dependence.
This is like solving puzzles. What about why?
Using why can turn verbs into nouns that often describe a quality or condition. Happy gives us happiness, and angry turns into anger. Notice how the spelling changes slightly for happiness.
I see. So spelling changes can happen. And T?
The suffix T is less common but still important. It can also turn verbs into nouns that denote an action or the result of an action. Argue becomes argument, for example.
Got it. What about ing?
The ing suffix is interesting because it can make a word into a gerund, which acts like a noun in a sentence, representing the action or process of the verb. Running from run, for example, can be a sport or activity, which is an abstract idea.
And finally,
Yes, can sometimes create abstract nouns, though it often denotes a person associated with an action. However, in contexts like discover, to discovery, it's more about the process or act of finding something, which is abstract.
Mr. Han, I found the verb transformations really interesting. So, how do we turn adjectives into abstract nouns?
It's all about suffixes again, Jane. By adding suffixes such as nest, tie, y, ity, and transforming t to ce or sci, we can change adjectives into abstract nouns that describe a state, quality, or condition related to the adjective.
Can you give me some examples with ness?
Certainly, ness is one of the most common suffixes for turning adjectives into abstract nouns. It helps describe a state or quality. For example, happy becomes happiness, and kind turns into kindness. It's straightforward. You just add ness to the adjective.
What about tie and ity?
Good question. Tie and ity are used to form nouns that express a state or condition. From able, we get ability, and from active, we derive activity. Similarly, cruel turns into cruelty. These suffixes help us talk about the concept of being able or the state of being active.
And does Y work the same way?
In a way, yes. Y can turn adjectives into abstract nouns too, though it's less common in this role. An example would be cloudy, deriving from cloud, though in this case it describes the weather rather than forming an abstract noun in the way we've been discussing.
I see. So Y is a bit of an outlier. What about when you mention transforming T into CE or Psi?
That's an interesting process. For some adjectives ending in T, Changing to ce or sci forms an abstract noun. For instance, infant, which can be used adjectivally, leads to infancy, and silent becomes silence. This transformation often signifies a state or period related to the adjective.
Yes, Mr. Han, it sounds like there's a whole world of abstract nouns formed from other nouns. How does this work?
It's quite a creative process. Let's start with hood. When you add hood to a noun, it often describes a state, condition, or period in someone's life. For instance, child becomes childhood, and mother leads to motherhood. These words convey the concept or state associated with being a child or a mother.
That makes sense. What about psi?
Adding psi to a noun can describe a state, condition, or capacity. From accurate, we get accuracy, and pregnant leads to pregnancy. These abstract nouns talk about the condition of being accurate or the state of pregnancy.
I see. And how does ship fit into this?
Ship is interesting because it often refers to the status, condition, or skill of someone. For example, friend becomes friendship, and leader transforms into leadership. These abstract nouns express the quality or state of being a friend or a leader.
Oh, I'm starting to notice patterns here. What about let?
The suffix let is slightly different because it's often used to denote a smaller version of something. So it's not as commonly used to form abstract nouns in the way we've discussed. It's more for concrete nouns, turning book into booklet, for example. So it's a bit of an exception to our focus on abstract noun formations.
Got it. That's a bit of an outlier then. And what can you tell me about an and ian?
Both n and ian are suffixes that can sometimes create abstract nouns by referring to characteristics or related concepts of the original noun, though they're more frequently used to describe someone from a place or a specialist in a field. For example, American from America, or musician from music. While not always forming abstract nouns in the sense of concepts or qualities, they do relate to identity or profession, which can be seen as abstract aspects of a person.
This is really broadening my understanding of how abstract nouns work. It seems like there's a suffix for nearly every situation. Mr. Han, I've heard that we're going to dive into the topic of countable nouns. Could you explain to me what countable nouns are?
Of course, Jane. It's wonderful to be here with you. Countable nouns are words that refer to things that we can count. For example, apple, book, and car. You can have one apple, 2 apples, or many apples. So anything that you can add a number to is a countable noun.
Oh, I see. So it's like when I say, I have 3 dogs at home. The word dogs is a countable noun because I can count my dogs.
Exactly, Jane. You've got it. Now it's important to remember that with countable nouns, we use words like a or n for a single item, and we change the noun to its plural form if there's more than one, like a dog for one and dogs for more than one.
Mr. Han, now that we've talked about countable nouns, I'm curious about making them plural. How does that work?
Great question, Jane. Making countable nouns plural depends on the ending of the word. For most nouns, you simply add s to make them plural. For example, book becomes books.
That sounds simple enough. What about the ones that end in s? You mentioned it briefly before.
Yes, nouns that end in s, ss, sh, chx, or z will take a s in their plural form. This makes the pronunciation easier. So, bus becomes buses, and box becomes boxes.
And what about the nouns that end in y? I've seen those change in different ways.
Indeed, Jane. If a noun ends in a consonant followed by y, you change the y to y's for the plural form. For instance, baby becomes babies. But if the noun ends in a vowel followed by y, you just add s, like day becomes days.
That makes sense. What about using a, an, and the with these nouns?
A and n are used with singular countable nouns to indicate one of something. A is used before words that start with a consonant sound, and n is used before words that start with a vowel sound. So you would say a cat, but an apple. That can be used with both singular and plural nouns when you're talking about something specific.
How about words like few, several, and many? How do we use those?
Those words are quantifiers that we use specifically with countable nouns to indicate quantity. Few, several, many, and a lot of indicate a larger number of items. You can say a few apples, several books, or many cars. It's a way to talk about quantity without being specific.
And what about all of, none of, some, both of, and any?
These are also quantifiers, but they are a bit different. All of and none of can be used with both countable and uncountable nouns. For countable nouns, you can say all of the students or none of the cars. Some and any can imply an unspecified amount, like some apples or any questions. Both of is used when referring to two items or people, like both of the dogs.
It seems like these rules help make everything clear and specific when we're speaking or writing.
Perfect, you've got it.
Mr. Hahn, I keep hearing about uncountable nouns. What are they?
Hi, Jane. I'm glad you asked. Uncountable nouns are words for things that we cannot count with numbers directly. They often refer to substances, concepts, and collective categories of things.
Oh, I see. Can you give me some examples?
Sure. Let's start with something simple. Water, air, and rice are good examples. You can't say one water, two airs, or three rices, right? Instead, we talk about them in terms of quantity without counting, like a glass of water, a breath of air, or a bowl of rice.
Mr. Hahn, before we wrap up, can you explain more about the specific characteristics of uncountable nouns? Like, I heard we can't use a or n with them. Is that true?
That's correct, Jane. One key characteristic of uncountable nouns is that you cannot use the indefinite articles, a or n, with them, because these articles imply a single countable unit. For instance, you can't say a rice or information. Instead, we use some or any to talk about an unspecified amount of these nouns, like some rice or any information.
What about definite articles? Can we use the with uncountable nouns?
Yes, you can use the with uncountable nouns when you are talking about something specific. For example, the water in this bottle is cold, or the knowledge he possesses is vast. The can be used because it refers to a specific instance or quantity of the noun, not to a single, countable unit.
Got it. And what about making them plural? I guess we can't do that, can we?
Exactly, Jane. Uncountable nouns do not have a plural form because they cannot be counted. Words like luggage, furniture, and advice stay the same whether you're talking about one item or multiple items. It's incorrect to add an s or s to make them plural.
That's quite straightforward. And when talking about quantity, should I use much instead of many?
Spot on. Since uncountable nouns are not counted, we use much instead of many when asking about quantity. So you would ask, how much rice do we need? Instead of, how many rices do we need? The word many is reserved for countable nouns, where the quantity is clear and definable.
What about using some and any? How does that work?
Some and any are often used with uncountable nouns to refer to an unspecified amount. Some is typically used in affirmative sentences, like, I need some advice. On the other hand, any is used in negative sentences and questions. For example, do you have any water? Or, I don't have any information.
This really clears things up. Understanding these characteristics will definitely help me use uncountable nouns more correctly. Interesting. Does English have any other noun categories?
One more worth mentioning is compound nouns, which are formed by combining two or more words to create a new noun with a unique meaning. For example, sunflower, toothpaste, and hairbrush. These can be written as one word, separately, or with hyphens.
Wow, nouns are more complex than I thought, but this breakdown makes it easier to understand.
I'm glad to hear that. Understanding the different types of nouns enhances your ability to categorize and use words accurately in speech and writing. Plus, it enriches your vocabulary as you become more aware of the nuances of English.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn. This deeper dive into nouns has been incredibly helpful. I'm starting to appreciate the beauty and complexity of language.
You're welcome, Jane. Remember, language is not just a set of rules, but a living, evolving means of expression. Enjoy the journey of learning, and don't hesitate to explore further and ask questions along the way.
I will, Mr. Hahn. Thanks for all your insights.